had identified human passion as the prime motivating force in the human world. But Marx identifies this force as the passion of greed for money in capitalist society. To Marx, greed has been the motivating force throughout all of human history, alienating man from himself and dehumanizing him. Man worships money as the all-powerful master. And now Marx moves on to the final and inevitable question. How can economic alienation be overcome? How can man reappropriate from the object which he has created his own essence? And the more fundamental question, how can man's self be regained? The entire world is distorted by alienation. Alienation infiltrates and pervades every aspect of human life, says Marx. Politics, law, the family, morality, religion, and economics. Alienation is the most important single character of man's life in human history. Man, the producer, has created a world of infinite objects and has lost himself in the process. Unlike Hegel's man, finite spirit, who in the course of history is continually progressing in consciousness of his own freedom, Marx's man, natural man, the producer, progresses in consciousness, but not of freedom, but of slavery, suffering, and exploitation. The law of his life is of constantly increasing alienation, says Marx, a law of increasing misery. For Marx, the only way for man to overcome self-alienation, to change himself, to free himself from the money mania, is to carry out a world revolution, a worldwide violent action which will seize the world of private property from the capitalists and appropriate all the material objects which humans have created throughout history. After a brief stage of raw communism has passed, there will come about the time of ultimate communism, which Marx also calls the humanization of mankind. Man will repossess the lost world of created objects and will regain his enslaved powers. Labor itself will be abolished, and in its place there will be free, joyous, spontaneous, productive activity. And the end of economic alienation will also mean the abolition of all the other human relationships in which man has lived a life of alienation in history. There will be an end to the state, to the family, to all law and morality. All of these institutions, in Marx's view, are forms of human slavery. Man will repossess, reappropriate, regain himself from alienation in these institutions, and he will live in unity with his fellow man and with nature in the communist world to come. These were the principal ideas of the hastily written, disjointed economic and philosophic manuscripts which Marx wrote in the summer of 1844. That summer, Jenny had returned home to Trier with her baby, where she had visited her mother and Marx's mother, both now widowed. Jenny had already begun a lifelong pattern of ill health, which was in part perhaps a response to the tensions, crises, and the grinding poverty of her life with Marx. Highly intelligent as Jenny was, she accepted but was troubled by the limited possibilities for self-development which were available to women in her day. But she served her husband faithfully and devotedly as his secretary, copying his manuscripts, handling his correspondence, and she, in fact, became knowledgeable in the sphere of radical philosophy and politics. A recent study of Jenny offers evidence that she is the actual author of several essays which had been credited to Marx. When Jenny returned to Paris in September of 1844, she discovered that Marx had established a friendship with Friedrich Engels, a friendship so stable and unwavering that it soon became a legend in its own time. Both Marx and Engels had much in common. They were almost the same age. Engels was 2 years younger. They came from upper-class homes. They both wrote poetry. They both became involved with a young Hegelian brand of radicalism. And they both moved on from that to communism and radical politics. But their intellectual styles and their lifestyles were very different. Marx was the speculative, creative, synthesizing type of mind, while Engels was practical and empirical. Marx was a family man. Engels was a womanizer and never married. Engels was the son of a Protestant family of wealthy cotton mill owners in the German Rhineland, and his lifelong career was in his family's business, and his interests were primarily in economics. During a year of his military service in Berlin, Engels came to know the radical young Hegelians at the University of Berlin. He soon became radicalized by them and wrote essays for radical journals such as Marx and Ruge's German-French Annals. And he also began to gather data for what was to be his, Engels's, finest work, The Situation of the Working Class in England, which was a bitter indictment of the early stages of capitalism. Engels had spent a year in England working at the Manchester branch in England of his father's firm, and on his way back to Germany, he stopped off in Paris, where on August 28, 1844, in a famous Paris cafe, he met Marx and began a conversation which ran on for 10 days, during which they decided to collaborate on a radical pamphlet which turned to be a 300-page book called The Holy Family. Before this book was finished, Marx was expelled from Paris and moved to Brussels. Engels soon moved into the house next door, and Marx and Engels began to work in September 1845 upon a criticism of the young Hegelians, which was to become their important work entitled The German Ideology. What is significant